Michael Gaine wasn't just killed, he was erased. A respected farmer from rural Kerry known for minding his own business, living alone, and tending to his cattle vanishes without a sound in March 2025. No forced entry, no known enemies. His wallet, keys, and phone are all found at home, exactly where he left them. Nearly 2 months later, his dismembered body is found stuffed inside a slurry tank on his own property by accident. A discovery so grotesque, so specific, that it forces one chilling question. Was this really just a murder? Or was someone sending a warning? Because this wasn't quick. This wasn't impulsive. This was a cleanup job, a calculated operation. And when you look closer at the method, the missing clues, and the people involved, there is a disturbing theory that starts to form. Maybe Michael Gaine knew something, and someone made sure he'd never tell. Michael Gaine lived a quiet life on a remote farm in Carrick East near Kenmare, County Kerry. He was a bachelor in his mid-50s, no wife, no children. Locals described him as reserved, friendly, and deeply tied to his land. He rarely traveled, didn't drink much, and spent most of his time tending to his cattle and sheep. But here's what's important. Gaine's land wasn't just some isolated patch of countryside. It was valuable, expansive, and strategically placed. And that's where the theory starts. People in the area, farmers, neighbors, even local officials have long spoken about illegal dumping, diesel laundering, and unauthorized land use quietly happening in remote parts of rural Kerry, and sometimes those involved use other people's land without permission. The question is, what if Gaine saw something? What if someone was using part of his land or nearby land for something illegal, and he either found out or refused to cooperate? And here's the fact that supports this theory. Gaine vanished without a trace, not from a trip, not from town. He disappeared on his own land, and his body was dumped inside a tank on that same land. That's not random. It's like whoever did this wanted to keep it close. Or maybe they were sending a message to anyone else who might be watching. Michael Kelley wasn't just a random name. He was the only person living or working regularly on Gaine's farm besides Gaine himself. A 53-year-old American man, Kelley had been staying in a mobile home on the property for roughly 3 years, working in exchange for food and shelter. On paper, it looked simple, a drifter helping out a farmer. But Kelley's background isn't so simple. He was ex-military, a former US Army trooper. He moved between the US, the UK, and Ireland, and had a history of personal and legal disputes, including a complex child custody battle in the States. Locals described him as quiet, intense, and strange. When Gaine vanished, Kelley didn't call the Gardaí. Instead, according to Gardaí reports, he claimed he thought Gaine was away visiting friends. But that doesn't match the man Gaine was. He rarely left his land without telling someone. And even more unsettling, Kelley remained on the property for days after Gaine disappeared. Then, when the body was finally discovered in the slurry tank, Kelley was arrested. But after 24 hours in custody, he was released. And then came the twist. Kelley publicly claimed he was being framed by organized criminals. He said Gaine had gotten involved in something dangerous, and now he was being used as a scapegoat. Sounds crazy, right? But here's the thing. Despite his odd behavior, despite being the only person tied to Gaine day to day, Gardaí didn't have enough to charge him, which leaves us wondering, if not Kelley, then who? And why would someone so close to the victim insist this wasn't personal but connected to something much bigger? When Michael Gaine's remains were finally found, it wasn't because police cracked the case. It was because his nephew Mark O'Regan was spreading slurry on the land and the machine got clogged. Inside the slurry tank, which had already been searched by Gardaí weeks earlier, they found Gaine's dismembered body. Let that sink in. His body was cut into pieces, dumped into a sealed slurry tank, in a spot that investigators had already checked and missed. Now here's where it gets disturbing but important. A slurry tank isn't just any tank. It's used to store liquid manure. It's toxic, dense, anaerobic, no oxygen, full of bacteria that break down organic matter. Translation? A slurry tank is one of the most effective body disposal sites on a farm. It's not something you accidentally pick. Whoever did this didn't panic. They didn't bury the body in a rush or dump it somewhere random. They chose a method that destroys DNA, masks odor, makes it almost impossible to recover the body. And that raises a huge question. How many people would even know a slurry tank could do that? Not just farmers, not just locals, but maybe someone with experience hiding evidence. Now tie this back to Kelley's claim. Organized crime framed me. Far-fetched on its own, but paired with the forensic level disposal, it makes you think. This wasn't just about killing Michael Gaine. It was about making him vanish. Here's a chilling fact from the Gardaí investigation. When Michael Gaine's body was pulled from the slurry tank, he was completely naked. No shirt, no trousers, no boots, no trace of his work clothes anywhere not in the tank, not on the property, not dumped nearby. Now ask yourself, why would a killer take the time to strip the body, remove every piece of clothing, and then hide or destroy them? It wasn't for humiliation. This wasn't symbolic. This was forensic awareness. Clothes hold evidence. Blood spatter that shows how he died. Fibers or soil that prove where he'd been. Traces of chemicals, oil, drugs, even things like pesticides or fuel contaminants. In organized crime investigations, the clothes are often the real evidence. So what if Gaine's killer didn't just want to hide how he died? They wanted to hide what he'd been exposed to. Think about it. What if Gaine walked into something, a hidden operation, a stash, an illegal dump site, and his clothes absorbed trace material? And whoever found out knew they couldn't leave that evidence behind. That's not random. That's not emotional. That's methodical. And here's the creepiest part. To this day, no one knows where those clothes are. They're gone. Just like whatever Michael Gaine may have discovered before he died. Michael Gaine wasn't a man of drama. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. Private, hard-working, not someone who caused trouble or got involved in anyone else's business. But here's the thing people forget about quiet men like him. When they do speak up, it means something's really wrong. So here's what Gardaí are now quietly looking into and locals are whispering about. In the weeks before his disappearance, there's evidence Gaine had become more withdrawn and possibly worried. He stopped going into town as often. He reportedly made a few unusual calls to people he hadn't spoken to in a while. Some say he was looking to have his affairs put in order legally, maybe financially. And here's the timeline kicker. Michael Gaine disappeared on March 20th, 2025. His last public sighting, buying phone credit. Was that just routine? Or was he about to call someone a solicitor, maybe Gardaí, to report something? And if so, did someone find out? Did he confide in the wrong person, someone connected to the very thing he wanted to expose? There's a dangerous pattern in Ireland's countryside. When people speak up about illegal activities, dumping, land deals, even criminal gangs operating in rural zones, they sometimes get threatened, sabotaged, or worse, disappear. Michael Gaine may not have had enemies, But maybe he had information, and that made him more dangerous than anyone realized. This is one of the most shocking parts of the Michael Gaine case, and it's not speculation. It's on record. Gardaí conducted multiple searches of Gaine's farm after he was reported missing on March 21st. They brought in drones, officers on foot, specialized units, and even searched the Slurry tank. But here's the fact that rattled the entire investigation. They didn't find his body. It wasn't until May 16th, almost 2 months later, that Gaine's own nephew, Mark O'Regan, found the remains by accident when spreading slurry and the machinery jammed. The slurry tank had been searched. It had been declared clear. So how did they miss a dismembered human body floating or submerged in it? There are only two possibilities. The body wasn't in the tank, yet when Gardaí searched, which raises disturbing questions about when and how it was moved after the fact. Or it was there the whole time and they missed it because they didn't drain the tank, didn't use the right equipment, or just didn't look deep enough. Either way, it's bad. But here's where the theory tightens. If Gaine's murder was a professional hit or connected to organized activity, then missing the body may have bought the killer's crucial time to clean up, to dispose of other evidence, or maybe to leave the country. And remember what Kelley said after his release. This was an organized setup. I'm being framed. They're still out there. Now, we don't take that at face value. But when you line up the facts, sloppy search, missed evidence, disappearing clothes, no charges, it starts to feel like this wasn't just a murder. It was a clean-up operation, and someone benefited from the delay. In rural Ireland, land is everything. It's not just a place to farm its generational wealth, a source of power, and at times a point of conflict that outlives the people fighting over it. Michael Gaine owned a sizable portion of land near Kenmare. He inherited it, maintained it, lived on it alone. But here's what matters most. He had no children, no wife, no heirs in his home. To people with long-term interests, legal or not, that makes a man like Gaine a prime target. Now, we have no public record of Gaine being in any court battles over his land. But in many Irish communities, land disputes don't always go through courtrooms. They go through quiet pressure, unofficial offers, and sometimes intimidation. Ask any rural solicitor. There are dozens of cases where landowners are encouraged to part with their property or pressured to look the other way while it's used for illegal activity. Here's what aligns with that theory. Gaine was reportedly a very principled man, the kind who wouldn't just roll over if someone tried to encroach on his boundaries. He had valuable land in a prime location for access to roads, woods, and remote storage, perfect for quiet criminal operations like diesel laundering, illegal dumping, or even rural drug grows. So what if someone wanted that land not to buy it, but to use it? And what if Gaine said no? That would explain why his death felt targeted, not random. Why there was no forced entry, no theft, just disposal. And why someone might go to extreme lengths to silence him and make it look like a mystery. This wasn't a property deal. This could have been a territory war, and Gaine may have been caught in the middle without even knowing how dangerous it was. When Michael Gaine vanished, Michael Kelley was the immediate focus. He was the only person living on the farm. He had a military background. He acted strange, so the Gardaí brought him in. But here's the key fact. They released him without charge after just 24 hours. And despite being the obvious suspect, there's been no rearrest, no formal accusation, and no solid forensic evidence tying him to the crime. That leaves us with two possibilities. Kelley did it, But the Gardaí completely failed to build a case. Or he didn't do it and someone knew he'd make a perfect fall guy. Now let's look at Kelley through a different lens. He was a foreign national. He had no family nearby, no real community ties. He was expendable in the public eye. And most importantly, he was already on the land when the crime happened. If someone wanted to commit a calculated murder and needed a cover story, then setting up a reclusive American worker would buy them time, confuse the public, and shift police resources in the wrong direction. Now here's where Kelley's own words come back. They're framing me. I'm not the killer, but I know who is. This was organized. It was about land. It sounds wild. But when you step back and look at the facts, dismembered body, slurry tank disposal, missing clothes, no theft, no motive from Kelley, and 0 charges. Suddenly, Kelley's paranoia starts to feel a little less crazy. Maybe he wasn't the monster in the story. Maybe he was the perfect decoy while the real killers walked away clean. Michael Gaine didn't die in a robbery. He wasn't caught in some drunken fight. He wasn't mugged or lost or taken in the night by a stranger. He was dismembered, stripped of his clothes, and dumped in a slurry tank, a place chosen not to hide him, but to erase him. His phone, keys, and wallet were still in the house. His clothes were never found. His body was missed during the initial search. The only person of interest was released, and to this day, no one has been charged. What does that tell us? It tells us this wasn't a crime of impulse. It was a message to anyone who might have known what Gaine saw, to anyone thinking of speaking up next. Whether it was a land conflict, an organized criminal operation, or a local power struggle, the one thing that seems undeniable now is this: Michael Gaine was silenced, and what he knew died with him. This case isn't just unsolved, it's unfinished. And if you look hard enough at the timeline, the missing evidence, and the voices that have gone quiet since, you start to see a different story than the one we were told. One where the killer wasn't hiding in the shadows. They were hiding in plain sight, because they knew how this would play out. They knew the land, they knew the law, and they knew no one would speak once Michael Gaine was gone. What do you think happened to Michael Gaine? Did he uncover something? Was it about land, a criminal operation? Or was this just the perfect storm of silence, power, and fear? Let us know in the comments and stay tuned, because this case is far from over.